Where is my daughter? Who are you? Get out of my compound. Tell me where she is. I don't know what you're talking about. That child is not yours. She was never yours. What are you talking about? Get out of my house! 7 years ago, your husband paid a nurse to tell me my baby died. She didn't die. You've been raising my daughter. No, it can't be.
I raised my husband's child from another woman, and she came back to take her. The question came from a 7-year-old girl standing in the middle of a courtroom in Alka, and it silenced every adult in that room. If I have 2 mothers, Kamsi said, her small voice steady in a way that broke everyone who heard it. If I have 2 mothers, why are you asking me to choose one? The judge looked down at his papers, the lawyers looked at their shoes, and 2 women seated on opposite sides of that room, both of them wearing the exhausted faces of mothers, could not look at each other at all. One of them had carried this child in her womb for 9 months. The other had carried her through fevers and nightmares and 7 birthdays. And before this story is over, one of them would have to answer the cruelest question a mother can ever be asked. Not do you love her? Every mother says yes to that. The question was worse. The question was, how much are you willing to lose to prove it? Before we go back to where it all began, if stories like this one touch something in you, take a second to subscribe to this channel and tap the notification bell, because we tell stories here that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. And if you've ever loved a child that did not come from your own body, this story is going to sit very close to your chest. Let's go back 7 years, to a rainy Tuesday in Onitsha, when a woman named Adaeze opened her front door and found her whole life waiting on the doorstep. Adaeze Okafor was 31 years old that year, and she measured her days in yards of fabric. She had a shop in the cloth section of the main market, a narrow stall pressed between 2 louder ones, where she sold lace and Ankara and George wrapper to women preparing for weddings and burials and the 1,000 ceremonies in between. She was known in that market for the way she could look at a woman for 10 seconds and tell her exactly which fabric would make her feel beautiful, which the other traders consider the kind of small witchcraft. She had been married to Obinna for 4 years by then. He worked with a haulage company, managing trucks that moved goods between Onitsha and Lagos, and he was the kind of man other women told Adaeze she was lucky to have. He came home at reasonable hours, laughed easily, argued rarely. If you had asked Adaeze in those days whether her husband kept secrets, she would have laughed at you the way you laugh at a person who has clearly never met the man in question. But there was a quiet ache in that marriage, and both of them carried it without naming it. 4 years and no child. Adaeze had done the tests. Obinna had refused to do his, in the way men often refuse, with jokes and postponements and a sudden busyness whenever the subject rose. His mother, Mama Nkechi, had stopped being subtle about it. At family gatherings, she would look at Adaeze's flat stomach the way a landlord looks at an empty property, and she had started saying things like, a man's compound should not be this quiet, while looking directly at her son's wife. Adaeze absorbed all of it the way she absorbed everything, quietly, and then went to her shop the next morning and folded fabric with hands that were steadier than her heart. She had her routines, and her routines held her up. She woke up at 5 without an alarm, and she kept a small exercise book under the shop counter where she wrote down every single day one thing she was grateful for, because her own mother had taught her that a bitter woman's chi eventually stops listening to her, and Adaeze refused to become bitter. Then came the rainy Tuesday. Obinna had been gone for 2 weeks, A long-haul job in Port Harcourt, he said. And he came home that evening, soaked through, standing in the doorway with the rain running off his shoulders, holding a bundle wrapped in a blue hospital blanket. Adaeze remembered afterward that she heard the sound before she understood the shape. A thin, furious, newborn cry. "Her name is Kamsi Ndinachi," Obinna said, and his voice was shaking. "Her mother is gone. She left her. She signed a paper and she left her at the clinic, and she is not coming back." Adaeze stood in her own parlor and felt the floor tilt. There were 100 questions stacked in her throat, and she asked them all in the weeks that followed. Whose child? When? How? Where is the woman now? And Obinna answered with the same story every time, told the same way with the same pauses, the way a man tells a story he has rehearsed or a story that is true. And Adaeze could not yet tell the difference. A woman from Asaba, he said, someone he knew briefly in a season of the marriage he was ashamed of. She did not want the child. She had made that clear in writing. The baby would go to an orphanage by Friday unless somebody claimed her. Adaeze looked at her husband and felt something she would spend years trying to describe. The betrayal was real and it was enormous, and it sat in the room like a third person. He had gone outside their marriage. The proof of it was crying on a blue blanket on her sofa. Any court of friends would have acquitted her if she walked out that night. But the baby would not stop crying, and nobody in that house knew what to do. And almost without deciding to, Adaeze crossed the parlor and picked her up. Let me tell you what the next 7 years looked like, because you cannot understand what was taken from this woman until you understand what she built. Adaeze did not forgive Obinna quickly or completely, and any woman listening will understand that some forgiveness is a road you walk for years rather than a door you step through once. But she separated the man's sin from the child's existence, because the child had committed no offense except being born, and Adaeze had waited too long for a baby to hate the one that God had carried into her house through the strangest possible door. She was the one who sat up through the malaria when Kamsi was 10 months old, sponging her small burning body in the blue light before dawn, bargaining with heaven in a whisper. She was the one who mashed the first solid food, who clapped for the first steps taken across the parlor floor between the sofa and her open arms. When Kamsi was 3 and sickness swept through her nursery school, it was Adaeze who slept on a plastic chair beside the clinic bed for 2 nights, and Adaeze's name the child cried in her sleep, Mama. Not a title the girl had been taught, a conclusion she had reached on her own, the way children reach the truest conclusions, by simply looking at who shows up. Adaeze sewed every one of Kamsi's school uniforms herself, on the old machine in the corner of the shop, and ironed them on Sunday nights while the girl did her reading aloud beside her. If you had passed their window on those evenings, you would have assumed, as the whole street assumed, as Kamsi herself assumed, that this was simply a mother and her daughter, because in every way that can be observed, measured, or felt, that is exactly what it was. Even Mama Nkechi softened in her fashion. A grandchild in the compound covered a multitude of questions. She never asked too loudly where the child had come from, and Adaeze noticed that, filed it away in the back of her mind as one more small strangeness, one more door in her marriage that nobody opened. The official story, told to neighbors and church members and Kamsi's school, was that Kamsi was Obinna's daughter from before, whose mother had traveled, and in Nigeria, that sentence ends conversations politely, and so the years passed and the story held. Kamsi grew into the kind of child that makes strangers smile in queues, gap teeth at 6, fiercely opinionated about the correct way to fold wrapper. She had a habit that undid Adaeze completely. Whenever she was praised for anything, a good result, a well-swept floor, she would look first, instantly, at Adaeze's face to see the pride land there,
as if the achievement did not exist until her mother had witnessed it. 7 birthdays, 7 Christmases, 2,500 ordinary evenings. Then, on an afternoon in March in the 7th year, a woman walked into the fabric shop. Adaeze noticed her the way traders notice everyone, in pieces: good shoes, a handbag that had cost real money, a face beautiful in a tired, deliberate way, like someone who had rebuilt herself from a photograph. The woman moved along the shelves without touching anything, and she did not look at the fabric at all. She looked at the framed photo hanging behind the counter, the one of Kamsi in her ballet costume from the school concert, and she looked at it for far too long.
Madam, are you looking for lace or Ankara? Adaeze asked. The woman turned. Up close, there was something in the arrangement of her face that pulled at Adaeze strangely. Some echo she could not place, like a song heard once through a wall. I am looking, the woman said quietly, for the wife of Obinna Okafor. You have found her. The woman nodded slowly, as if confirming a rumor she had paid dearly to verify. Then she said the sentence that split Adaeze's life into before and after. My name is Chidima. 7 years ago, in a clinic in Asaba, I gave birth to a daughter. I have come for my child. The market did not go silent. That is the strange thing Adaeze would remember afterward. The market kept its full roar, traders shouting prices, a radio playing High Life 2 stalls down, the world entirely unaware that inside one narrow shop, a woman was holding the edge of her counter to stay upright. You are mistaken, Adaeze heard herself say. Kamsi Dinachi, born on the 14th of March. There is a birthmark shaped like half a moon behind her left ear. I have not seen her since she was 6 days old, but I named her before your husband ever did, and I have the documents to prove everything I am saying. And now, standing in her own shop, Adaeze finally recognized the echo in the stranger's face. It was Kamsi's face, Kamsi's exact eyes, set in a grown woman's grief. You signed her away, Adaeze whispered. You left her. You signed a paper and you left her at the clinic. Something moved through Chidima's expression then. Something Adaeze could not read in that moment, but would remember later when she finally understood what it was. It was not guilt. It was astonishment. The astonishment of a person hearing for the first time the official version of her own story. Is that what he told you? Chidima said. It was not a question. She placed a lawyer's letter on the counter, on top of the folded lace, dead center, the way you place something you have imagined casing 10,000 times. Then she walked out of the shop and into the roar of the market. And Adaeze stood there with the letter in front of her and the framed photo of the dancing girl behind her, caught exactly between the two. Obinna denied nothing that night, and that was somehow worse than lies would have been. Adaeze put the letter on the dining table between them after Kamsi had slept, and she watched her husband read it, and she watched the color change in her face like weather. The letter was from a law firm in Asaba. It stated in the bloodless language of such letters that their client, Miss Chidema Egu, is the biological mother of the minor child known as Kamsi Dinachi Okafor, that no valid adoption had ever been conducted and that no court order of guardianship existed, and that their client was formally requesting the commencement of custody proceedings. Tell me she signed the paper, Adaeze said. The paper you told me about, the one where she gave her up. Tell me it exists, Obinna, and go and bring it and put it on this table. Obinna sat down slowly, and he aged in front of her. It was complicated, he said. There are sentences that end marriages, and they are almost never dramatic sentences. They are small, weak, sideways sentences, and it was complicated is chief among them. Over the following days, the legal situation became clear, and it was brutal in its simplicity. There had never been an adoption. Adaeze had raised Kamsi for 7 years on the strength of a story and a blue blanket, with no legal standing whatsoever, not one document in existence that connected her to the child she had nursed through every fever. Under the law, Chidima was the mother, Obina was the father. Adaeze, the only mother Kamsi had ever known, was, in the eyes of the law, nobody at all. A stranger with a sewing machine. Barrister Okolie, the family lawyer they consulted in Auka, an old man with kind eyes and a merciless honesty, laid it out plainly for them. A biological mother who was never legally divested of her rights and who arrives with a stable home, a steady income, and no criminal record is standing on very strong ground. Our strongest argument is the child's welfare and the bond of 7 years. But I will not deceive you, madam. Courts in this country are very reluctant to keep a child from a fit biological mother. Very reluctant. And what does the law say about the mother who did everything, who was present for everything? The old man looked at her with genuine sorrow. The law, he said, has not yet learnt how to measure that. Word travelled, as word does. Within 2 weeks, the matter was general knowledge from the market to the church. Some traders squeezed her hand and said God would fight for her. Others she overheard. After all, she is not the real mother. That word real began to follow Adaeze around like a stray dog she could not chase off. As if the fevers were imaginary. As if the 2,500 evenings had happened to someone else. Mama Nkechi arrived from the village uninvited and installed herself in the house, radiating opinions. Her position was simple. The woman was a shameless opportunist. The family should use money and connections to crush her quickly. And above all, the case must not reach open court, where the family name would be washed in public. But Adaeze, watching her mother-in-law across the parlor, noticed something underneath the loudness. The old woman was afraid. Not worried. Afraid. And her fear had a specific direction. Whenever the details of 7 years ago came near the conversation, whenever anyone asked exactly how the handover at the clinic happened, Mama Nkechi changed the subject with the speed of a woman stamping out a small fire before it reaches the curtains. Adaeze filed that away too. The back of her mind was becoming crowded. The hardest part was not the law or the gossip. The hardest part had a gap-toothed smile and did her reading aloud in the evenings. Because children hear everything. They hear through walls and under doors and in the sudden silences when they enter rooms. Kamsi began asking questions with the terrifying precision of a 7-year-old. Why did Mama Nkechi come to stay? Why was Mama crying in the bathroom with the tap running? Did she think the tap hid the sound? And then, one evening, over her homework, without looking up, in the exact voice she used for asking whether rain would spoil tomorrow's break time, she asked it. Mama, Amara in my class said her mommy said you are not my real mother. What does it mean? Every parent knows there are questions you rehearse for. This one, no rehearsal survives. Adaeze put down the wrapper she was folding, and she took her time, because her own mother had taught her that a child can forgive a slow answer, but never a false one. It means that another woman carried you in her body before you came to me. She is called your birth mother, and being carried is a great gift, and we do not insult it. But hear me, Kamsidi Nachi, a mother is also the one who stays. I have been staying for 7 years, and I will be staying tomorrow and the day after it. Nothing that anyone says in this town can unstay a single one of those days. Kamsi considered this with the gravity of a high court. So, I have 2, she concluded, and returned to her homework, satisfied, because at 7, the heart is still generous enough to believe that love is not a competition. The adults, meanwhile, were preparing for exactly that. The first mediation meeting was held in the Ministry of Women Affairs office in Oka, in a room with a slow ceiling fan and a social welfare officer named Mrs. Adigwe, who had the weary competence of a woman who had watched 100 families take themselves apart across her table. Chidima came with her lawyer and a folder. Adaeze came with Obina, Barrister Okole, and 7 years. It was the first time the two women had sat facing each other, and Adaeze made herself study her opponent, and what she saw disturbed her, because she had come to prepare to face a villain, and instead she was facing a wound. Chidima's folder told the story of her 7 years, a nursing qualification and in Enugu, a steady position at a private hospital in Asaba, rent receipts, bank statements, a church letter. It was the file of a woman who had spent 7 years methodically building a fortress of respectability, and Adaeze understood exactly what she was looking at. This was not an impulse. This woman had been planning her return for years, laying each document like a brick. My client, Chidima's lawyer said, was 19 years old and completely without support when she gave birth. Her circumstances have transformed. She is asking for what the law has never taken from her, her daughter. And my client, Barrister Okole, replied, is the only mother the child has ever known. Remove her and you do not transfer the child, you break her. Mrs. Adigwe asked the question Adaeze had been waiting 7 years to hear answered. Madam Chidima, help this table understand. What kind of mother leaves a 6-day-old baby and does not look back for 7 years? The room went still. Chidima looked for one long moment directly at Obina, and Obina, Adaeze saw with a chill that started at the base of her spine, looked at the table. I did not leave my baby, Chidima said quietly. My baby was taken. The lawyers erupted, both at once, procedure and objection, and this is not the forum, and the moment was buried under the noise. But Adaeze had seen it, the look, the lowered eyes, and that night she stood in her kitchen and understood that she had been fighting this war blind, inside a story written by someone else, and that before she could fight for her daughter, she would have to do something more frightening. She would have to find out what had actually happened 7 years ago, even if the truth burned her own house down with her inside it. If you are still with me in this story, let me ask you the question Adaeze asked herself that night, and you can tell me your answer in the comments. If the truth could cost you your marriage, but the lie could cost you your child, which one would you choose to live inside? Adaeze chose the truth, and she went digging with it with the only ally she trusted completely, her elder sister, Ithelma, a school principal in Asaba, a woman built entirely out of common sense and stubbornness, who had disliked Obina politely for 11 years and had never once said so until the day Adaeze called weeping, when Ithelma said only, I am coming, and hung up. It was Ithelma who found the thread. The clinic in Asaba where Kamsi had been born still existed, and its retired matron still lived nearby, and school principals in Nigeria know how to find anybody retired. The two sisters sat in the old matron's parlor on a Saturday afternoon, under a wall of faded baby photographs, and the old woman looked at the picture of Chidima that Adaeze held out, and her face folded with an old, specific sadness. I remember her, the small girl from that march. I have carried that one in my conscience for 7 years. Tell me, Adaeze said. She was 19, no husband, no mother, nobody. Only the man came, the tall one from Onitsha, and he came with his own mother, an iron woman that one, wrapper tied like armor. Adaeze's blood slowed. Mama Nkichi. They paid every bill, and extra, plenty extra. And on the 6th day, when the girl was sleeping, because a girl who has just given birth sleeps like the dead, they carried the baby. There was a paper, yes, I saw the girl sign it the day before. But my daughter, listen to what I am telling you. That girl could not read it. She held it upside down until the iron woman turned it for her. They told her it was hospital discharge forms. I heard the old woman say it with my 2 ears. Discharge forms. And when the girl awoke and the cot was empty, the crying that came out of her, I still hear it some nights. She came back to this clinic every week for 1 full year,
asking if we had an address every week. Then one week she stopped coming, and I thought, thank God she has died or she has healed, and either one was mercy. The parlor was very quiet. One of the faded baby photographs on the wall, Adaeze realized, was of a 6-day-old girl with half a moon behind her left ear. So, there it was, the midpoint of Adaeze's life, the hinge on which everything turned. Kamsi had not been abandoned. Kamsi had been harvested, taken from a sleeping teenager by a rich family who wanted the baby without the inconvenience of the girl, using a signature obtained from a child who could not read what she was signing. The woman Adaeze had spent months resenting as a deserter was in fact the first person this story had ever been stolen from. And the story itself, the rainy Tuesday, the blue blanket, she left her, she signed, she's not coming back, had been manufactured in advance and delivered to Adaeze's doorstep by her own husband, with her mother standing behind him in the dark, like a director behind a curtain. Adaeze did not cry in the matron's parlor. She thanked the old woman properly, and she walked to Ifeoma's car, and she sat in the passenger seat, and she looked straight ahead through the windscreen for nothing, and she said, drive. The crying came later. It always does. The confrontation happened on a Sunday evening after Kamsi was asleep, and Adaeze had planned it the way she planned everything, carefully. But no plan survives the moment a marriage tells itself the truth. She put it all on the dining table, the same table where the lawyer's letter had sat. The matron's account, the dates, the name of the iron woman with wrapper tied like armor, and she watched her husband and her mother-in-law receive it. And their two reactions taught her everything about the past 7 years. Obina wept. Mama Nkechi attacked.
And so what? The old woman said, rising to her full height, voice pitched for the whole compound. So what did we do that mothers-in-law have not done since the world began? The girl was nobody. A market girl of 19 with no family behind her. Was my son supposed to marry that? Was my grandchild supposed to grow up in a face me, I face you in Asaba? We gave that child everything. We gave you everything. Or have you forgotten your own empty womb? You should be kneeling to thank me. I put a daughter in your barren house. Some words once spoken cannot be unspoken, and they change the temperature of a family forever. Adaeze stood very still and let the words finish landing. Then she spoke, and her voice was so quiet that both of them leaned in, which is a power that quiet women have always known about. You did not give me a daughter, Mama. You gave me stolen property, and you let me love it until returning it would kill me. That is not a gift. That is the wickedest thing one woman has ever done to 2 others. She turned to Abina. And you, 7 years you watched me. You watched me tell that story to neighbors, to the church, to the child herself. You built me a life out of another woman's screaming, and you let me decorate it. She took a breath. I am not leaving this house tonight because my daughter sleeps in it. But you should know that whatever this marriage was, you buried it 7 years ago at that clinic on the 6th day while a teenager was sleeping. Obina reached for her hand. She looked at his hand until he withdrew it. Now, listen, because this is where the story stops being simple, and where Adaeze had to become more than a wronged woman, because the truth she had dug up did not only burn her marriage, it burned her case. Every hour, her lawyer had been building the argument that Chidima had abandoned her child. That argument was now not only false, it was obscene, and Adaeze knew it, and she alone got to decide whether the court would ever know it. Barrister Okole, when she told him everything, was silent for a long time, and then said the words that defined the war's final shape. Madam, understand your position. If we suppress this, we may win. Abandonment, 7 years of silence, the bond with the child. We can paint that woman as a deserter, and the court may believe us. If we reveal it, the sympathy of any judge alive swings to her entirely, and we will probably lose your daughter. So I must ask you formally, as your counsel, which case am I building? And this was Adeze's turning point, the choice that made her the protagonist of her own life rather than a casualty of other people's plots. She thought of Kamsi, who looked to her face to see whether achievements were real. She thought about what it would teach the universe if the woman that child called Mama won her by drowning another mother in a lie, the same way Adaeze herself had been drowned in one. Build the true one, she said, all of it, and then find me one honest path through it. The honest path, when they found it, ran straight through the most frightening territory of all. Adaeze asked to meet Chidima, alone. No lawyers, no husband, no documents, neutral ground. They met at a quiet restaurant in Asaba on a Thursday afternoon, two mothers of one child, and for the first minute, neither of them managed a word. It was Adaeze who finally spoke, and her voice was so quiet that both of them leaned in, which is a power that quiet women have always known about. I know what they did to you. I found the matron. I know everything now, and I came to say it to your face. What happened to you was an abomination, and I was living inside it without knowing, and I am sorry. Chidima had come armored for battle, and the apology went through the armor like it was not there. She cried the way people cry when they have been waiting 7 years for one specific sentence. And then, in that restaurant, over cooling bottles of soft drink, the two women did the thing the lawyers and the law had no procedure for. They talked. For 3 hours. Chidima spoke of the year she returned to the clinic every week, of nursing school chosen because she never again wanted to be the person in the room who could not read the paper, of the fortress of documents, 7 years of them, each one laid like a brick with her daughter's face in her mind. And Adaeze spoke of the malaria at 10 months, and the plastic chair at the clinic, and the reading aloud on Sunday evenings, and she took out her phone and showed the ballet photos, and Chidima held the phone in both hands like communion. She is happy, she said. It was half question, half grief. She is happy, Adaeze said, and she is asking questions. She knows she has two. For one fragile hour, it seemed possible that this story would resolve itself right there between the two of them, woman to woman, without a courtroom at all. Then Chidima's phone rang, and she stepped away, and when she came back, her face had closed like a gate. That was my lawyer, she said. Your mother-in-law's lawyer contacted him this afternoon. They are offering me money to disappear, a very large amount. Her voice shook. The same family, the same method. They bought my silence once when I could not read. Now they think they can buy it again because I can count. She gathered her bag. I was sitting here beginning to trust you, and your people were pricing me like a cow behind my back. There is nothing more to discuss. I will see you in court, and this time nobody will carry my child out of any room while I'm sleeping. She walked out, and Adaeze sat alone at the table, watching 3 hours of impossible progress burn to the ground because of a phone call she had known nothing about, made by an iron woman in Onitsha, who still believed every problem on this earth had a price. The case went to court in June, and it went badly, then it went worse. Chidima's lawyer, sharpened by the insult of the bribe, came in swinging with everything: the circumstances of the taking, the unread paper, the bribe attempt itself, documented, dated, devastating. Mama Nkechi's scheming had handed the other side its finest weapon, and the family sat in the courtroom and watched their own name washed in public, exactly as the old woman had feared, except that she herself had done the washing. The judge, a measured man named Justice Nwafo, listened to the account of the 6th day at the clinic with a stillness that was more frightening than anger. And then came the day Adaeze would relive for the rest of her life. Pending final judgment, the court granted an interim order. Structured visitation, escalating to extended stays. Kamsi would begin spending weekends with her biological mother in Asaba, supervised at first, then not, so that the court could assess the child's adjustment before ruling. It sounds mild, a paper language. Let me tell you what it looked like in a human house. It looked like packing a small pink bag on a Friday afternoon for a 7-year-old who stood in the corridor asking, "But you are coming with me, Mama Abi?" It looked like kneeling on the floor of that corridor holding 2 small hands saying, "You are going to visit Auntie Chidima, the one I told you about, who carried you first. 2 sleeps. I will be here when you come back. I am not going anywhere." And watching the child's face perform arithmetic no child should be assigned.
It looked like standing at the gate watching a car shrink down the road with the most important cargo in the world inside it, then walking back into a house that had changed its acoustics, every room suddenly enormous, the silence coming off the walls like heat. 2 sleeps became 4, then a fortnight in August. The reports that came back through Mrs. Adigwe were their own species of torture, because they were good. Kamsi was adjusting. Kamsi liked the hospital where Auntie Chidima worked and had informed the staff she would be a nurse. Chidima was, by all accounts, patient and gentle, never once speaking against Adaeze, never forcing the word mummy. The woman was not failing, and somewhere in the darkest cellar of her own heart, Adaeze discovered a shameful tenant she had not known lived there, the wish that the woman would fail. She dragged that wish into the light, looked at it with disgust and evicted it, but it had been there. She was honest enough to know it had been there. The lowest point arrived quietly, the way the worst ones do. It was a Sunday evening in September, the end of the fortnight stay. Kamsi came home subdued, went to bed early, and then near midnight Adaeze heard crying through the wall, and went in and found the girl sitting up in the dark, and what she said broke Adaeze in a place that has no name. Amara said the court will make me pick, Kamsi whispered. If I pick Auntie Chidima, will you die? Ngozi's mommy died, and Ngozi said it is because nobody was there. If I pick you, will Auntie Chidima go and be nobody again? She showed me the paper she could not read, Mama. She keeps it in her Bible. Why do I have to break one of my mothers? 7 years old, sitting in the dark, doing triage on the hearts of grown women. Adaeze held her daughter and understood, finally and completely, that every adult in this story, herself included, had been fighting over the child while standing on top of the child. That the girl was not the prize of the war. The girl was the battlefield, and battlefields are the only thing wars reliably destroy. She did not sleep that night. She sat in the parlor until dawn with her exercise book of gratitudes open on her lap, unwritten in, and she thought about the question from the restaurant, the cruel question the whole story had been walking toward. Not, do you love her? How much are you willing to lose to prove it? And by morning, Adaeze knew what she was going to do, and it frightened her more than anything had ever frightened her in her life. The final hearing came in October. The courtroom was full because Onitsha and Auka had been feeding on this case for months. Mama Nkechi was there, subdued at last, her armor dented. Obina was there, hollow, a man who had watched consequences arrive for 7-year-old sins with compound interest. Chidima sat across the aisle, Fortress Street. And in the middle of the proceedings, before the lawyers could begin their final submissions, Adaeze stood up and asked the court's permission to speak, not through counsel, but herself. Barrister Okole, who had been warned, closed his file and let her go. What she said, half of Anambra heard retold by nightfall. My lord, everybody in this room has spent months asking who Kamsi belongs to. I stand here to say we have all been asking the question backwards, myself first of all. The question is not who does the child belong to. The question is who belongs to the child. And the true answer, the answer everybody in this courtroom already knows, is both of us. The woman across this aisle was robbed while she was sleeping. I will not stand in any court and profit from that robbery. Because if I win her daughter with a stolen advantage, then I am no different from the people who stole her in the first place. And my Kamsi will one day be old enough to read this judgment, and she will know exactly what her mama did to keep her. I would rather lose her honestly than keep her the way she was taken. So I am asking this court not to make my daughter break one of us. She asked me, my lord, why she has to break one of us,
7 years old, and she asked me that in the dark. I could not answer her. I am asking this court to answer her better than I could. Then she turned in front of the full room and faced Chidima directly. I raised your daughter. You gave me my daughter. Neither of us chose how it happened, and both of us will die for her. I am not your enemy, Chidima. The people who wronged you are sitting in this room, and I am not among them, and you know it. Come and see the house where she grew. Come and see the machine where I sewed her uniforms. There's room in that girl's life for every drop of love this world can pour into her. Do not let the people who broke us decide that we must also break each other. The courtroom, packed with strangers who had come for spectacle, was entirely silent. And it was into that silence that Justice Noafo, setting aside procedure with the weariness of a man who had seen too many children divided like property, asked for the child herself to be brought in and gently questioned, as the law permits, about her own understanding. Which is how a 7-year-old girl in her school uniform came to stand in the middle of a courtroom in Alka, look around at every adult whose wars had been fought across her small body, and ask, in a voice steady in a way that broke everyone who heard it, "If I have 2 mothers, why are you asking me to choose one?" And that is how the beginning of this story became its ending. Justice Noafo delivered his ruling 2 weeks later, and lawyers in Anambra still discuss it. Primary residence with Adaeze, in the only home and school and street the child had ever known, because a court serving the child's welfare does not bulldoze her entire world to satisfy an adult timeline. Full, generous, legally protected parental access for Chidima, expanding as the bond grew, with the explicit written recognition, rare and deliberate, that the child possessed 2 mothers and that the court expected both women to conduct themselves accordingly. A formal guardianship order, at long last, putting Adaeze 7 years on paper, making her, in the eyes of the law, no longer nobody. And a referral, cold and specific, recommending investigation into the circumstances under which a signature had been obtained 7 years ago from a 19-year-old who could not read, a referral that would follow Mama Nkechi into her old age, poetic in its precision. The woman who weaponized paper against an illiterate girl would now spend her remaining years answering to paper. But court orders only draw the map. People still have to walk the road. And the road was not simple, and I will not insult you by pretending it was. Adaeze and Obinna did not survive. Some marriages break loudly. Theirs simply stopped, like a clock nobody rewound. He moved to the Lagos end of the haulage business before Christmas. He sent school fees and visits his daughter, and when he greets Adaeze at the gate, they speak with the careful politeness of former countrymen whose nation no longer exists. She had told him the truth that Sunday night at the dining table. The marriage died at that clinic on the 6th day, 7 years before she buried it. And the 2 mothers built something that had no name. So they built it without one. It was awkward before it was easy. There were misunderstandings, a jealous flair or two, a Christmas negotiation that nearly required its own tribunal. But there were also the other things. Chidima at the school concert, 1 row behind Adaeze, both of them recording, both videos shaking at the same moments. Kamsi's 8th birthday, 1 cake, 2 mothers, and a child so rich in love that she had begun to take it for granted. Which, if you ask me, is the only luxury every child on this earth actually deserves. And on one evening in the fabric shop, Chidima sitting on the customer stool, while Adaeze folded lace, and the old matron's ghost of a sentence hanging gently over the scene. The girl came back every week for 1 year, asking for an address. Well, she had the address now. She was sitting in it. Adaeze still keeps the exercise book under the counter. On the night the judgment came, she wrote one line in it, and it is the line I will leave you with because it is the whole story in 11 words. Love is not owning something. Love is refusing to steal it. Because hear me well, the people in this story who lost everything were the ones who treated a child as property, who believed love could be signed for, paid for, transferred like goods on a lorry. And the women who won were the ones who opened their hands. Adaeze was asked the cruelest question a mother can face, how much she was willing to lose, and she answered by risking everything she loved rather than keep it on honestly. And in the end, it was that open hand, not the courts, not the lawyers, not the money, that gave her daughter back to her whole. A mother is the one who carried you. A mother is also the one who stayed. And any house with room for only one kind of love is a house too small for a child to grow in. So now I am asking you, and I genuinely want to know, if you are in Adaze's position, would you have revealed the truth that could cost you your child or buried it to win? And if you were Chidema, could you have forgiven the woman who raised your stolen daughter? Tell me honestly in the comments, because I read them, and stories like this one have as many right answers as there are mothers listening. If this story touched you, please give it a like so it can find the next person who needs it. Share it with somebody who understands this kind of love, and subscribe to the channel with the notification bell turned on, because we have more stories like this waiting for you. Stories about the things families do in the dark and the light that finds them anyway. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Sleep well and hold the people you love with an open hand.